a commodity is really just a thing, it's an object. But when we move to the notion that the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, that wonderful drink of cold water, is a gift from Shkaklikwe, from Mother Earth. It's a relationship, and a reciprocal relationship.
Hello, friends. In this episode of Insights at the Edge, my guest is Robin Wall Kimmerer. Robin is a scientist and a brilliant writer, best known as the author of the widely acclaimed book, Braiding Sweetgrass: Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. She's a mother, a decorated professor, an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. She's a tremendously gifted storyteller and educator who is currently 72 years old and living in a farmhouse in upstate New York, writing, speaking, teaching, and tending gardens, both cultivated and wild. In 2022, Robin Wall Kimmerer was named a MacArthur Fellow. And then in 2023, she received the National Humanities Medal. In 2025, she launched a new movement. It's called Plant, Baby, Plant, a way for individuals to be involved in loving the natural world around us. And we're going to talk about that, Plant, Baby, Plant. Robin, welcome.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction and for the invitation to chat today.
I'm tremendously thrilled to talk to you. And the reason, I'm just going to say it right here at the beginning, is that I found myself, when immersed in your writing and speaking, moving to a different channel of perception. I'm not quite sure how else to say it. The food in my bowl started looking different and tasting different. The world outside my window, the plants that I see growing here in British Columbia where I live, they started looking different too. And I want to begin by asking you about this change in worldview and your understanding of that as the person communicating it through your writing and teaching.
What a beautiful backdrop for that question, because if there's anything that I hope that stories can do, it is to help us see the world in a different way, in this rich and simultaneously intimate and expansive way. And so I'm delighted to hear that there's been that transformation for you. And for me, what you're really talking about is the gateway or the path that is opened by paying deep attention. When you start to see the world not as things, but as beings, as relatives who are around you, you walk through the woods in a different way. You walk through the city in a different way. I think you go to the supermarket in a different way. And so that change in perception is to me so exciting and can take us out of the sort of mechanistic worldview in which we live. Yeah, that dualism, the old dualism between matter and spirit, to me, I want to erase that and have them, dance together.
Part of what I think you opened up for me that was fresh and that I want to give as a gift, if you will, to our listeners is this deep sense of gratitude for what the plant world is already giving to me that I haven't been in touch with. And you communicate that as someone bringing together indigenous wisdom with science. And I think some of the teachings, I mean, I've heard, of course, for many years, as many people have, all of us are related, all my relations, and the interconnected web of life. But after reading your work and listening to you teach, I started feeling what I'm receiving all the time that I'm not aware of. And I wonder if you can speak to that.
Yeah. I think what feels like it's surfacing for me is this difference between um, an object, a commodity, if you will, and a gift. Um, because a commodity is really just a thing, it's an object. But when we move to the notion that the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, that wonderful drink of cold water, is a gift from Shkokmikwe, from Mother Earth. There's so much intention there. You feel like, oh, for me, that gift is for me. It comes with relationship. It's no longer a thing. It's a relationship, and a reciprocal relationship, where in return for those gifts, as we well know, someone gives us a gift. What do we want to do? We want to say thank you. We are moved to gratitude, and the kind of gratitude that we're talking about is not, just sort of a polite thank you, isn't it? That doesn't really change you. That's just convention. But the kind of deep gratitude, which I think of as existential gratitude, to know that without you, I would not be here. And that is, I think, an illuminating, enlivening kind of gratitude that makes you, I'm trying to think of whose word that is, that I don't remember, but that it re-enchants the world. And it becomes full of relationship, not full of things. Can I give you one example of that?
Please.
I was once giving a talk at a big university's College of Natural Resources. And I did my spiel. I don't remember what the talk was about, but I do remember that College of Natural Resources was trying to change their name. Because when we think about what natural resources means, it means raw materials that we will take from nature and convert into something that we value. That is what it means, right? And there they were, the College of Natural Resources. And as they were trying to think about what to rename themselves, I sort of cheekily offered, you should call yourselves the College of Earthly Gifts. And the whole room sort of fell silent. And then there was like this exhalation, this sigh, and this look on people's face in the audience was like, oh, I want to work for the College of Earthly Gifts in a way that the College of Natural Resources doesn't call you. And I think it's exactly what you're talking about, in that transformed feeling about your home place when you realize that you're walking through a landscape of gifts. You're in a completely different relationship to that place than if you're walking through a warehouse of natural resources.
Well, and that I wouldn't be here without the oxygen. I wouldn't be alive. Like literally, my very life is being sustained. It is a gift from the earth itself. And having that in awareness all the time.
And Tami, I think another element of it that your example of oxygen brought forth for me is that not only are you receiving that gift of oxygen that the plants have generated for you, but every one of your exhalations of carbon dioxide is what they need to thrive. So you're not just taking from the living world, you are giving back. And that's why I say you're in relationship. And it is that giving back. I think it's that reciprocity that makes us feel that we belong in the natural world, as opposed to feeling alienated. So I think those are some of the elements of the feeling that you're naming.
Now, I want to bring us right into the time that we're in here in the beginning of 2026, because here I'm talking about this tremendous sense of loving mutuality. And many of us are deeply concerned that we're either on the precipice of climate catastrophe or we've already gone over the precipice, depending on which climate scientists you talk to. And I wonder how you view this particular time from your vantage point, combining science and indigenous wisdom.
Mm. You know, I feel that precipice, and your the way you navigated that of, are we over the precipice? Are we just on the brink of it? Are we approaching it? Um, are often questions that are asked, but I want to push back on that because a precipice means you're going to fall off and tumble to the bottom, and that will be the end of things. That's not how nature works. It's all a continuum. Are we past a tipping point with the parts per million in the atmosphere? I don't know. I'm not a climate modeler, but we're darn close, right? We're in trouble. We're in big, big trouble. But that doesn't mean that we're falling off the cliff. That means that things are going to be different, that we're going to have to live differently, that our plant and animal relatives we're all going to suffer. But it doesn't mean that we are smashing at the bottom of the cliff. And the reason I say this is because we don't give up hope. We don't give up pushing back just because we have crossed a threshold that says, oh, this is bad news. It is bad news, but we can make it less bad news if we continue to strive and push for the climate adaptation strategies. So that's why I want to push back against it, because that can be really defeatist to say, we're over the edge. Well, I think we are always approaching an edge. We're always approaching a cliff, and we need to step back from it and reach out a hand to the one who's dangling below us. And that we still have work to do.
So, what would you say, like if you have a metaphor or description of this time that, oh, here's how I see it, Tami. I mean, forget the precipice thing. Let's leave that alone. Here's how you see how humans have gotten to this point. What's happening now, right now in time? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, there's so many ways to think about this, but one of the ways I've been that I find helpful is, I call it like the age of remembering. I think about Joanna Macy's teachings of the Great Turning. Um, uh, Joanna's words are probably more familiar. So I would say we are in the time of the Great Turning, where we understand that our actions have, in some cases, incrementally and unintentionally, and in other devastating cases, quite intentionally, pushed us to this situation. But that if we value our plant and animal relatives, if we value this beautiful planet that was given to us, we have to do the work. We have to do the work of healing. And so that's the great turning, isn't it? The great turning of turning away from those actions, behaviors, and worldviews that poison the earth, and turning toward regeneration and healing. That's why I call it the great remembering, because as an Indigenous woman, I am full of the stories and the knowledge of the way that for most of human histories, people interacted with the living world in a way that was grounded in gratitude and reciprocity. This extractive worldview, which we are living with now, is quite honestly, it it's what, 400 years worth? And you think, well, that's a long time. Not, it's an oblique of time in human history. We are in an era of a profound error And we are, I think, collectively remembering who we want to be in the world and the world that we want to live in. And so that's the moment that I feel like we are in. We could call it the great turning, the age of remembering that we have to turn away from those things which have brought us to this point and do the work of healing.
I'm going to share a very brief little story with you, which is I only read Braiding Sweetgrass recently. And I had the book in my hand,
Mm-hmm.
and I read this little section about connecting to a spirit of place and what that is like. And you were talking about someone who was a friend of yours that you were dating at the time. And you said, "Do you have a sense of a spirit of place?" And this person said, "Well, I love being in my car when there's internet and being able to be on my phone when I'm in my car." And I thought, I can relate to that. I love being in my car. And then you proceeded to talk about how this person and you didn't stay intimately connected for long. And over the course of this person's life, they actually were so depressed that they, and you said it in just a very factual way, killed themselves in their car, their favorite place, their car. And I thought, wow, I love this woman. I love the way she writes. I love the way she just said that right there in a few paragraphs about how far we are away from an age of remembering that our favorite place could be sitting in our car on the internet, on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sharing that with you because it really stuck with me as sort of where we've come to.
Right. And I think it's a very potent story that you're sharing because it opens this door to saying, well, what if your favorite place is legitimately your car, as you're saying, because I'm comfortable, I'm safe, I have all these conveniences around me. Um, and shouldn't that then fill you with vitality and satisfaction and fullness if this is your favorite place? But that I think creates the question of how do our places feed us and care for us? And in that particular example, I think one would argue that there was a deficiency of sense of belonging. Um, of is that all there is? It's the ease of my push buttons, without going into that person's story. That's not the point, really. It's that how we think about creating and being in places that that care for us in an expanded sense of self. You know, your comments, push me to think about the way that much of the environment that we designed, as opposed to the environment that was designed by nature, caters to our individual needs. In the case of a car, I can program my seat, my whatever, right? This sort of deadly convenience, because we have this sense of self which is so unitary. It is me, just my body, my mind. That is me. That's what self-interest looks like. And so much of our designed environment is built for that person. But what if your sense of self is a distributed, permeable self that, I am not really me. Um, I'm actually looking at deer out my window right now, Um, we're sharing this same habitat. We're sharing breath. The water that I'm drinking comes from this place. It's not me. I am in relationship to the food that I eat, which is in relationship to the groundwater, which is in relationship to those deer. So I feel like if we can help to cultivate an expanded, permeable sense of self, which really moves into the we, not the I, then we come to cherish places of self interest for a much bigger self. Does that make sense?
It does, and I wonder when it comes to connecting with a spirit of place, if your sense of your own selfhood is, "Oh, this is the space I occupy. It's this ecosystem, or is it bigger than that? Are you living right now in a universal sense of being, or does it depend where you are in the moment? Like right now, you shared before we started recording, you're in a cabin someplace. Is your sense of place, X number of miles from where you and I'm just curious to understand that for you. It's probably
That's a
very changeable.
That's a fascinating question, of what is the scale of sense of place. And I suppose that's different for everybody. But for me, I feel myself and describe myself very deeply as a citizen of Maple Nation. Um, my sense of place is this forest. And because I know most everyone here, and though it's everyone's being the more than human, everyone's, and they know me. We are in reciprocal relationship with one another. I feel, embedded in the history of this place, hopefully in the future of this place. So that's what creates sense of place for me. It's a biome. I guess it's a kind of bioregionalism. I know there are folks I know who describe their sense of place as planetary or continental or indeed urban. I am a Manhattanite, or I am from Chicago. Um, those are the right scale for that person.
How do you know that Maple Nation knows you? How do you experience its knowing of you?
Wow, it is so deeply intuitive. I guess I think I know it. I'm just experimenting here, Tami. I don't know if this is true. Um, it goes back to the gifts that we talked about at the outset. I feel like a place, Maple Nation, knows me because of the way that it cares for me. When we think about, does a human know us? Well, if they've really got your number about what you need, what you like, what's going to make you feel safe and comfortable, I get that from the forest that I live in. The food, the medicines, the teachings from the land, the smell of the air. It's as if my interior landscape and my exterior landscape are like this. That's how I feel known in this landscape. And I wonder whether somebody who has their sense of place in an urban block, do they have that same sense of this is a place that cares for me, and therefore that I can care for too? Fascinating question.
You contributed an essay to a collection called The Mind of Plants.
Yeah.
And the question that was being addressed is one of the questions being addressed is what is intelligence and how might we understand plant intelligence? And you talked about something called brain chauvinism. And I'd never heard that phrase before, but it's something I've been really curious about because I can sense intelligence in all kinds of beings that don't have brains, but I never know how to talk about it with people without sounding like, I don't know, a fruitcake. But yet I feel the intelligence of non brain beings. So I wonder if you could help me understand how to talk about that intelligence.
You're so right that we need a vocabulary for that. And that term brain chauvinism is certainly not my own. There's this wonderful community of folks who are thinking about, um, uh, some people call it the neurobiology, the cognitive science associated with the more than living world, including, of course, now revolutionary work being done in plants. And so, for the longest time, people have dismissed those feelings that they might have that you're describing, that, oh, there's something going on here. But brain chauvinism really is that, well, they're not intelligent the way I'm intelligent, so therefore they're not intelligent. Or they're not intelligent the way animals are intelligent, so therefore they're not intelligent. And so a lot of the beautiful work that's being done in plant cognition, I guess, plant intelligence, you would call it, is to think about the way that plants are so different from us, and that they have this distributed intelligence. Every single bud on the plant is capable of making decisions about what it's going to do. Uh, so it's not a brain, it is lots and lots of brains. So it's a whole different way to think about how we sense the environment and make um, uh, dynamic decisions about how to react to the environment. But you're so right, we don't have a vocabulary for it. And although it's being invented as we speak, so exciting. A book that I really value by Zoe Schlanger is called The Light Eaters. And Zoe is a journalist, science journalist, who has put together stories around the scientists who are doing this revolutionary work, and including the way that they have been dismissed by many colleagues. Well, this isn't possible. Well, we just have to imagine. And But when I say imagine, I don't mean that this is imaginary. We have to get outside of our own brain chauvinism to say, what would intelligence look like? So it's it's so exciting.
I like this phrase, distributed intelligence. I can feel that and sense that and think of the root systems in
Ah,
trees, that kind of thing. And in the article, you talk about one way of thinking of intelligence is adaptively variable behavior. And I thought, well, that we can think of how plants adapt as needed. But okay, here's my question. You ready, Robin? And it's a little odd, but I don't get the chance to talk to someone like you very often, and it's a question I've had for a long time. How do you talk about the intelligence? We're going to go beyond plants now and talk about rocks and minerals, because I also sense the intelligence. I mean, I'm not trying to turn myself into anything. I like rocks and minerals, and they're
mhm.
my friends, and I relate with them, and I sense that they're giving something to me, and that if I touch or hold them, I'm giving something to them. So I sense that. But once again, I don't know how to talk about an intelligent rock.
Yeah, and I would love to hear more how you're experiencing that, because I don't have a lot of that direct experience with rocks. And I know people who talk about that. And in my own culture, our rocks, particularly big boulder rocks, are understood as elders. They're understood as storytellers because they have been here for so long. They have seen it all. And but they experience those changes and transformations in ways that um, are opaque to me. Um, so I wish I could answer your question, but I can't because it's
But
not.
even just using that phrase of elders, that's powerful. That changes the entire uh, view.
Mhm.
Not something I take a hammer to and destroy, an elder. And
Right.
I read in your writing, once again, from the perspective of indigenous wisdom, talking about human beings as the younger brother in creation versus our human exceptionalism, where we're the apex creature or something like
Right.
that. And
Right.
but it's interesting thinking of us in this different part of the map, younger to our elders, like the rocks. And I wanted to talk about this because I think I hear a lot from people, oh, humans are the problem. If only we could get rid of humans, the earth would flourish. And it seems to me in your work, You have a very different response. And I want to bring that forward. That's not about erasing humans, it's about shifting how we are and creating a reciprocal way of being a positive contributor, which in many ways we're not right now, but it's not about getting rid of us.
Right. It's about, we're back to that age of remembering. Of how I don't think that humans inherently are the problem. Humans who have adopted a worldview of human exceptionalism are the problem. People who think the world is their property, that belongs to them, that all the rest of the world is lesser than them, that's a problem. So to me, it's the worldview that is at the root of this very negative way of thinking about human people. But a worldview is malleable. A worldview changes. For most of human history, people have lived in a balanced reciprocal relationship with the living world that has magnified human well being and the well being of the land. And again, we have to recognize that we are in this time of error, and we can change our ways. And to me, that is very hopeful. We can heal from this, but we have to change ourselves. And so much of environmental discourse is, sadly, well, we have to change policy, we have to change light bulbs. With it, okay, all of those things are true. We have to change ourselves. We have to change the stories that we are adopting as our purpose here on the planet. And if we stick with the story that it all belongs to us, that we're living in a big old warehouse of commodities, that's self-destructive. But if we say, oh no, we are living in a garden, and a garden needs gardeners to take care of it, to harvest all the gifts, not all the gifts, because all the gifts are not for us, but that we also give back. And that's consistent with the way ecosystems work, and indigenous ways of being have shown us that that's a way that you can live in what we say manoba mudzi, when the living in balance, in a good and balanced way.
The experiment that you describe in Braiding Sweetgrass with Lori and the sweetgrass experiment of the different plots of sweetgrass growing, that story blew my mind, and I wonder if you can
Right.
share it here.
It's so coherent with the philosophy of your question, right? Yeah, here's the story. And again, thinking of how it is grounded in indigenous practice and philosophy. Um, I'll try to give you a quick version of that for your listeners. But the story is that one of my graduate students and I were planning to do research around the threats to sweetgrass, because sweetgrass basket makers were telling us that it was seemed to be dwindling. And so we are doing a lot of research to try to understand the problem. And we needed to evaluate what was the relationship between sweetgrass harvesters and sweetgrass, because some people said, well, if people are picking it, that's the problem, in that mindset that you just articulated. Oh, people are bad, we're always going to mess things up. So Lori and I had a hard time getting her research even approved, because our fellow conservation biologist said, why would you do this experiment? Anybody knows that the harvested plants are going to decline. Um, why are you going to do this for graduate research? We did it anyway. They were embedded in this Western worldview that humans are bad for nature, that we're just going to take, and our taking is bad. So we did the experiment in sweetgrass meadows. We imposed different levels of harvest, mimicking traditional harvesting practices, which are respectful and restrained. And so we had some plots that were harvested by various ways, and we had one plot that was our control. Of course, the plots where there was no harvesting at all. And my conservation biology colleagues would have predicted, as they did predict, well, of course, that plot that no one harvests, that's going to thrive. Well, guess what the plants told us? That plot that nobody picked dwindled away and was outcompeted by other plants. The patches that were harvested using these respectful traditional techniques doubled in size. The plants were stimulated by harvest, by the right kind of harvest. They would have declined by, aggressive harvest, but the people could meet their needs, and the plants responded by saying, "Oh, we've been harvested. We need to grow back." It's a phenomenon known as compensatory growth. A lot of plants do it. A lot of plants don't too, and those you don't harvest in that way. It all depends on the nature of the relationship. But it was an empirical, experimental way of demonstrating that in this case, people were good for sweetgrass. Harvesting stimulated sweetgrass. It didn't cause it to decline. And this is what Native people sort of have folded into this code of ethics of the honorable harvest and the teachings that were shared with me of, if we accept the gifts of the plants and use them respectfully, they will stay with us and flourish. If we ignore them, they will go away. And that is exactly what our experiment showed, that human beings were not a plague on sweetgrass. Human beings were a partner to sweetgrass.
This notion of reciprocity, of giving and receiving, I actually think it's very intuitively obvious to people that we want to be in a balance of giving and receiving. At least I feel that. I mean, that to me is just like the nature of my heart. If somebody gives something to me, I want to give something back to them. And I know give to people, they want to give something back to me. It's just, the way it goes. That's the way it is. And yet, I think a lot of us, and I'll speak for myself, I feel I've been given so much in so many ways. And when I was reading your writing about the unpaid debt that we have to plants and animals, I thought, I have an unpaid debt. I got to work on that. And then I thought, what about the unpaid debt that I have to the indigenous people of North America? And then I thought, wow. And I felt really kind of heavy and down. And I thought, I have to ask Robin about that and her view of how we balance giving and receiving with indigenous people today as a contemporary person, how I express my love and gratitude in a way that will pay this debt.
Yeah. How are we in reciprocity with our history? With a history of land taking, right? With a history of erasure, with a history of intentional assimilation and degradation of a culture. And I say those things because we need to name the wound in order to heal it, right? And so, how are we in reciprocity? Let's take one little piece of that. How are we in reciprocity with illegal land taking? How can you ever heal that? 2 words: land back. That's how you do it. Say this was unjust. When I look at public lands, all the so-called public lands are indigenous homelands. They're federal lands, they're state land, they're municipal lands that never belonged to those entities in the first place. They need to be returned. And in some cases, there are ways that people are thinking about land back. In some cases, absolutely direct land return. There are some brilliant pieces of work where communities have gotten together, motivated by the very question you're asking, Tami, and say, how can we give land back? How can we rematriate land? And they're doing it. all over the country. In other places, land back or rematriation looks like shared access. When you think about privately conserved lands, land trusts, let's say, or nature reserves, broadly speaking, um, those are, again, Indigenous homelands which are being protected for the citizenry, but Native people, for the most part, cannot go there and pick basket materials or harvest medicines because these are protected lands. A way of healing that wound is to create access for Native peoples to their own original homelands, which are now owned by somebody else who probably doesn't even know or care that they have important traditional medicines on their land or foods. But we can design mechanisms by which we have access um, for for people. So those are just two small examples, but there's many more. You know, we repay the debt associated with erasure of Indigenous history by demanding that it be taught in our schools. We pay the debt for cultural degradation intentionally taken place by supporting language revitalization, supporting tribal sovereignty. Um, so we have to name those wounds and then say, okay, how do I, out of the what I have to give, how do I heal that wound?
And just to also track back, in terms of repaying the debt that we feel to the gifting earth, as you called it, to that department,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you were to give anybody some suggestions for when they're in nature, they're on a walk, they're in a park, they're with a tree at the corner of their block, and they want to offer some gesture of reciprocity from their heart or in words, or what might you suggest? Oh, this would be meaningful, Tami.
Mm. That's a hard question to answer because I'm sorry, as a scientist, my answer is always it depends. It depends.
I think that's a smart answer often
Yeah,
to a lot of these questions.
yeah, it depends. But I mean, one of the first things that you can do is is there trash around that tree? Pick it up. You know, help in that very simple way. People often think, well, I ought to leave something. And certainly you can leave your gratitude and and your good wishes. But you can also think about how can I make this place better? Um, and one of the ways that you can do that in a very direct, immediate, I'm going to pick up this can right out of the park or whatever. But I'm also going to be sure that I make a donation to my local land trust. I'm going to be sure that the gifts of having trees in your neighborhood are available to all of us. I'm going to join the tree equity movement to be sure that municipal policies in my city are 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 toward having walkable nature within 10 minutes of every person in the city. You look at the disparities in the tree canopy, for example, between affluent and struggling neighborhoods. You know what that looks like. Where are the tree-lined streets? Where are the benefits of nature? We have to plant. We have to plant, and we have to insist on that equity. The question that you're asking kind of moves us toward this new movement that we're trying to create out of as a counter narrative to the words that drill into my soul, which is drill, baby, drill. You know, that notion, that mantra that says, we don't care about the climate. We're going to keep pumping carbon dioxide in anyway. We don't care about the sacredness of Mother Earth. We're going to drill into her anyway. And so the notion is, well, we have to resist that politically, right? We have to resist that economically, but we can also resist it with a counter narrative that says, no, I'm not a drill baby drill person. I'm a plant baby plant person, meaning that here we are in this climate crisis. Who knows what to do about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? First of all, we don't add any more, right? And plants, with every breath that they take, they are turning carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere into soil, into leaves, into birds, into berries. So, plant baby plant is to say, let's do that. Collectively, let's do that. This is something that you and I can do. I am not going to be able to, stop drilling in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. I can write all the letters I want. I can't do that, but I can plant as many trees as I can, encourage my neighbors to do that. I can create pollinator gardens. I can ally myself with plants who will do the work of these nature based climate solutions. Um, from the tiniest micro action in your own yard to parks, to public lands, to landscape scale work. And that is something that it feels like in this moment of the great turning, we are called to do, which not only to me, it is, I guess, to come full circle in our discussion today, it is restoration. It's healing the land, but it's also restoration. To say, no, we are going to embrace the story that we human people are givers to nature. We can plant. We are not just takers. And you don't just say that, you do it. And you do it with your neighbors. And that's what Plant Baby Plant is meant to do, is to be a call to that action and support for both healing the earth and healing our relationship to earth.
I was looking at some of the examples of actions on the Plant Baby Plant website of people who are writing in saying, here's what I've done. I've created this community garden and I've
Yeah.
created this rooftop garden. And I think a part of me had this reaction like, these are really small things. Do they really make a difference? Question mark. Like part of me is with you and, small is all and do something and be a giver. But then I also have this voice in my head that says, wow, drop in the bucket. And it's a big bucket. And really? That's what I got?
Yeah, I have the same reaction. The same reaction. Is this enough? Is this enough given the scale of what we are facing? No way. No way. Nor do we claim that it is. But it is a drop in the bucket. But we know the power of those collective drops as well. And one of the other things that I feel confident in is if you encourage people to take an action, no matter how small, that prepares them to take a bigger action. It cultivates a sense of agency and participation in something bigger than yourself. And so maybe you start with converting your carbon emitting chemlawn to a native plant garden, which creates biodiversity, habitat for insects and songbirds, and sequesters carbon. Okay, it's just your front yard. But what about your neighbor and their neighbor and their neighbor? Collectively, it matters. Collectively, we start to build a different story and a different relationship. We restory at the same time as we restore. But no claims that this is going to solve the problem. The scale of carbon in the atmosphere and the decarbonization that needs to happen far exceeds our small efforts. This is why we have a dual mantra at Plant Baby Plant, which is raise a garden and raise a ruckus, of holding our so called leaders accountable. Um, And so yeah, it is meant to support grassroots work, but also meant to enlist people for system change.
This is maybe an odd question, but I am curious about it, which is your own emotional landscape, if you will, which I know changes and it depends and all of that. But how much time do you spend in outrage and despair versus enjoying and celebrating the beauty of the world we're in when you're looking at deer out your window, having this conversation with a nice person like me? Uh, how does that what does that balance look like in the inner world of Robin Wall Kimmerer?
Well, given the times that we are living in, how can you not be outraged, right? Um, Not only outraged, but in deep grief for what we have done and what we continue to practice. Um, so I'm often deeply sad and enraged. I don't think you would be sane if you weren't enraged in this moment. But I also know deeply that we have to turn those emotions to the work. We have to feel them. I think, we, in this country especially, we tried to shy away from those negative emotions that we feel, especially grief and sadness and what has been called solastalgia. What a beautiful word by Glenn Albrecht. He gave us that word of related to the grief that we feel around the destruction of our places. Um, but to me, all of those negative, they're not negative emotions. They are what they are. Those emotions um, are a pathway. We feel them because we love the land so much. And for me, I am aware, I was going to say every day, probably every day, of that balance of grief and love. And despair is not for me an option. Um, I have to do the work, and and it just comes from love. When you love someone or some place, when they're hurt, when they're sick, as our lands are right now, you don't turn away from them. You turn toward them, right? You care for them all the harder, love them all the harder. So that's my emotional landscape.
That's very helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to ask you this other question too, because I've been trying on in our conversation this notion of the age of remembering. And I'm like, huh, that's so interesting. And I can, using my imagination, this poetic imagination function, kind of put myself into a different place and a different time, imagining a different era. And then I think, well, wait a second. You're going to go somewhere and you're going to get on a plane, Tami, and you're going to be in this 21st century world, but remembering this different ethos, but encountering all of the contradictions of your life every day. How do you put that together?
Well, it's absolutely true. I think we all experience that. And I think the way that I navigate that is to be, first of all, to constrain my own consumption as best I can, and to try to live those principles, but to also say that we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, to use that old adage, that we can't practically do everything all of the time, but we can do our best and push ourselves beyond our best to push ourselves into a new relationship. So again, it's sort of like that notion of we're going to fall off the climate cliff, game over. Well, I'm still burning fossil fuels. I mean, yes, I have a heat pump. I have solar panels on my head. On my head, on my roof. On my head, that'd be great. I recycle, I compost. I support my local economies. I'm doing the best that I can, and then I get on a plane, and it undoes a lot of my carbon balance. It's real, but I'm very mindful in trying to balance that out, and to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
In this honoring of reciprocity here, as we end our conversation, first of all, I want to acknowledge and thank you for giving Sounds True and Insights at the Edge your time today. And I want to give something back to you. I'd love to know, here are listeners who are listening, and they're feeling in their hearts the desire to make an offering that you would think to yourself, wow, I'm so glad I went on that show because I got to ask XYZ from all of these people who listened, and a whole lot of them followed through on it. What would it be?
To me, one of the most important things that every single person can do is to honor the fact that each one of us, I truly believe, was given a gift and the responsibility to use that gift. My gift is different than yours, is different than every one of your listeners. But the call that I would issue is to say, what is your gift? And exercise the responsibility to give that gift to the more than human world. We're pretty good at giving gifts to each other in our human communities. But to ask yourself, what does the earth ask of me today? And it asks you to give your gift. And it might be that you're an artist, and so you can do transformative work that calls people to action. Maybe you're a wonderful chef and a cook. How do you honor the gifts of the land in the way that you serve your community in that way? So to me, there's never a one size fits all, except to say, what's your gift? And give it. Don't keep it to yourself. We are in a time, boy, are we in a time when we have to remember that old mantra of our silence will not save us. One of our gifts is our voices, our stories, our standing up for one another. And that's a gift, and we are called to give it.
Robin Wall Kimmerer, thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing your gifts forward relentlessly as you do. You inspire me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tami. What a good conversation.